You're on.
Hello. Hi, Malcolm. And our guest, Victoria Alzapiedi, I will introduce her in a little. But we just want to welcome you to the Many Shades of Green, which is on malcolmpresents.com and the Many Shades of Green. And this is where we want to kind of mix up our greens and bring you information about environmental issues, which we hope will raise your eco-consciousness. We need people to become more aware. And today we're going to focus on the topic of trees. I'm a tree hugger. I know you guys are you? And we need to cherish every leaf and branch because their value to our lives on Earth is invaluable. So trees deserve our love and gratitude. And so go out and hug a tree, whether you're in LA, which is a lot easier, or here in New York. Our guest this week knows a thing or two about trees, and so we're welcoming again Victoria Alzapiedi, who is an environmental consultant and founder of My Native Garden Oasis, providing coaching and guidance to homeowners who want to create thriving habitats for birds, pollinators, and beneficial insects in their own yards. So when you come into my house,
I'll be right over.
All right, you can ski over. Victoria is also the co-founder of Newcastle Healthy Yards, co-chair of Newcastle Pollinator Pathways Coalition, and a member of the Newcastle Conservation Board. She's a steward of Mother Earth and does everything in her power to protect the flora and fauna of the planet. She was also raised in Brooklyn as, hey, that's a good thing for me and Malcolm. We're also raised in Brooklyn, right, Malcolm?
Look at my sweatshirt I just wore.
There you go.
Brooklyn and Brooklyn on the side.
Brooklyn, baby.
Great.
So we're representing.
But just a funny story. When I go around with my wife and we go on vacation, any place we go, we always find someone either that's from Brooklyn or went to Lincoln High School that Max and I went to. And my wife is from El Salvador, and she always says, it's amazing. Any place we go, we're meeting someone from Brooklyn or at Lincoln High School. Anyway, take it over, Max.
It's all the branches, right? People from Brooklyn, their branches go far and wide around the globe.
We are trees, that's for sure. But back to Victoria. She's also a graduate of UC Hastings College of Law, where Vice President, and I'm saying no elect, Kamala Harris went. So woo! And she holds a master's degree in public administration from Harvard Kennedy School. And you are pretty much incredible. So you're gonna have to tell us after where people can get in touch with you, and so we can, I know there's websites and all sorts of things that we can do that. So it's important that we get to the topic. And I said, come to my house because I would like to learn about what you're doing. So why do you feel that it's so important and even urgent to educate homeowners about the importance of trees in their yards and not to slice them down?
Yeah, good question. And thank you for having me. It's thrilling to be here, and I appreciate the work that you both do. So thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. And Maxine, I guess when I think about how people perceive nature, often we think nature is somewhere else, right? So you go to Yosemite, you go to Yellowstone, you go somewhere beautiful, far away to experience nature. You go out for a weekend, a hike, a long, vacation. And really our own backyards are nature. Walking down the street in a town, you can have trees, habitat, shrubs. So the idea of starting to, yes, continue to appreciate the nature that is around the globe and in preserves and sanctuaries, national state parks, it's really important to understand that nature is right around us and to really start becoming aware of the value and the importance of the trees that are around us, the shrubs, the flowers, and the impact they have on our entire ecosystem. So we think about, we see a tree, often people in their own yards, They buy a tree because they think it's pretty, or they think it will have a nice landscaping impact. And they're not really thinking about how that tree fits in with the birds that live there, with the insects that live there, how it really is part of an ecosystem and interconnected with all the other aspects and dimensions of nature. And that if we can take steps in our own backyards to plant trees, shrubs, other living, foliage, we can have a huge impact on supporting nature, on supporting the birds. A lot of nature is threatened right now due to development. People continue to chop down trees and forests and woodlands to build homes, commercial development. And we kind of don't really think on a more macro perspective that if we continue down that path, we won't have any trees left. And if we don't start looking at our own yards as a wildlife sanctuary, it's important to kind of think about, if you look holistically at the United States, and if you added up all of the acres of parkland, of, state, national parkland sanctuaries, the number of acres is far exceeded by the number of acres in our own private property, in our own yards, the private property that's owned by individuals. So there's really a responsibility that we have as property owners to understand the importance of supporting the ecosystem, and trees are a huge part of that.
Right, it seems that lawns have more monocultures. It's the biggest in the country, are lawns. Just grass that you just throw pesticides into, which is a whole other topic, and try to keep it green. And that is a real problem for pollinators and insects. And so how do we get people to grow more, healthy trees and shrubs and not be all lawn, and then hopefully not use pesticides? How can we do that?
Mm-hmm. I think it definitely starts with education and awareness raising. When you start telling or talking with folks about the vast array of different types of trees. I grew up in Brooklyn, as we were talking about earlier, and I had no idea the difference between an oak tree, a maple tree. I just didn't know. I didn't know the differences. Now, living in the suburbs here in Westchester, where I live, I've become very aware of each type of tree. And when you think about, tuning people in, there are certain trees that support a huge amount of wildlife and nature, and a certain number of trees that don't support anything. So think about butterflies, right? We all love butterflies. The monarch butterfly, we all now know that monarch butterflies need to lay their eggs on milkweed, right? It's a very special plant, and a monarch butterfly needs to find that milkweed plant to lay its eggs, because the baby caterpillars that hatch out of their eggs can literally only eat milkweed. They can't digest any other plant. So if we want to support the monarchs who are increasingly endangered, we want to plant milkweed. Well, trees also support moths and butterflies. There are certain butterflies that need specific trees in order to lay their eggs and to propagate the next generation. So when you start showing people, and this is what I do in my work, when you start showing people that if you plant an oak tree, specifically the species oak, it supports more than 400 types of moths and butterflies. So there are more than 400 specific butterflies and moths that need the oak tree to reproduce. And when you start planting oak trees and seeing the unbelievably gorgeous butterflies and moths and caterpillars, beautiful caterpillars, you start seeing that propagating in your own yard. And you start seeing the birds that come who rely on oak trees to nest, and the other animals that rely on acorns to eat. So when you start thinking of your environment, your yard as a habitat, it becomes much more appealing to then say, okay, I want to attract this type of bird. Like northern flickers love ants. They need ants to live. So a lot of trees support insects, right? And we don't realize, but if you go walk up close to a tree, you can start seeing all the insect life. And as we may know, insects are in huge decline right now. You were talking about pesticides, Maxine.
Right.
Pesticides kill so many insects. And what we're finding is locally, regionally, globally, the insects are declining because they're being killed, they're losing their habitat, and they're being poisoned by insecticides and pesticides. So if we want to continue the process of pollination, right? If we want our ecosystem to continue to thrive and be healthy and support life, and fruits and vegetables and, you know, all the things that we eat that come from plants, we really need to start taking accountability on our own yard. So I think one of the responses to your question is cluing people into the joys of what they will see in their own yards if they support native trees and plant native trees and preserve the ones they have on their property.
One thing I want to bring out, sometimes the nature, you know, the ants and the different insects, to certain people are the enemies. I mean, they don't appreciate that there's an ecosystem, but I know, like, there's certain weather, the ants are in the house. And I hate pesticides, but I don't know how to get rid of the ants that come in the house, because you drop a grain of sugar and you turn around and there are 20 million ants there.
Right.
So yeah, I know. I mean, it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Malcolm.
Yeah, it's nature versus humanity, and that's lots of other things, like even like bees that come, or I think like the hornets, or what were the killer hornets that people were.
Oh, the murder hornets that they were.
The murder hornets. And so it's almost man against nature. It's not. They're not working in harmony together.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that you should say that. Yeah, I mean, there really is. And again, having grown up in Brooklyn and mostly living in cities all my life, and now living in the suburbs for the past 12 years, it really does feel like it's a war. It's a war between the homeowners and nature. And what bug is going to enter the home? Is it going to be an ant? Is it going to be a spider? You know, and what are people going to see? Are they going to have a hornet's nest in a tree near their house? Are there yellow jackets going to be there, or some other, you know, flying wasp? So it is a really interesting question, and people come to me all the time. You know, what can I do naturally to deter these insects? One great thing about insects, like all other creatures, is they need their own space. They need territory. So typically, when you see a large number of insects, they will eventually disperse. Even if you see a huge number of ants, for some reason, the ants are there in that moment. And maybe it's a grain of sugar in your house, or, you know, something outside. I always tell people to be patient, that the ants and other creatures, insects, are usually very transient, and they're there for a reason. There are some insects that swarm. So a few weeks ago, there was unusual weather, and this time of year, there's a hatching of flying insects, a specific species. And it's for some people terrifying. It's like a huge swarm. They don't know whether these are dangerous, and they're not learning. They're moving into their homes. And instead of people educating them about these different bugs and whether or not they're harmful, and most of them are not harmful at all, instead of being educated about that, they're getting announcements in their mailbox from pesticide applicators. You know, I'll come over now and kill everything that crawls in your yard. And don't be afraid, I'll come and you know, kill all the insects. And immediately people will say, oh, great, I don't want these insects that might sting me or crawl near me, because it's a lack of understanding. And again, it's a little bit of fear. And often information and education is our greatest kind of weapon against fear. And I can't tell you the number of people I've educated about wasps that don't even have the capacity to sting, that are beneficial pollinators. And once people know that, they can see them in their environment and appreciate them.
Yeah, two little stories about my experience with insects. I lived in Manhattan in an old brownstone, and for whatever reason, you cannot get rid of roaches. Roaches will survive us. Roaches have been around since the dinosaur. They're still here. They're around in subtropical weather. And Antarctica, they could, you know, freeze. Because, well, I say with the roach, I think there's a new generation about once every 10 minutes. So whatever insecticide you use, you know, in 10 minutes, the new generation is immune to it. So for a while in New York, the big thing was to get tarantulas. Tarantulas would eat roaches. So people would have tarantulas like caged or something, and they would come and they would kill the roaches. That was fun. And just in the Museum of Natural History, I don't know if they still do it, but once a year, they'd have an exhibit of roaches, and they do the whole history of not how they started, but that they were in prehistoric times with the dinosaur, and now. The second thing is one of the ugliest creatures I've seen, and I don't know, how their mates can take them, is the opossums. First time I saw an opossum was here.
But they're like, uh-oh, you're in trouble.
No, opossums looked like, when I first saw it, looked like
they're so cute.
It looked like a rat that had been nuked, and the genes were mutated because it was so big. But now, where I'm living now, the opossums come and eat my cat food. But then I found out the opossums kill other insects. That's their natural.
Yes, ticks is one of them, right? Yeah. Victoria?
Yes.
Victoria,
yes.
Please address the possum and save Malcolm from his possum fear.
I've come to view the possum in the new point of view, since I found out that they get rid of a lot of the insects that we.
They're totally an ally. They are fascinating creatures, and as Maxine was saying, they are one of the greatest allies or weapons we have against Lyme disease, because they voraciously eat ticks. So they, are covered with ticks and eat really thousands of ticks. So having a tick in our yard is a natural way to counter Lyme disease. So you have people spending thousands of dollars a year applying pesticides for Lyme, to prevent Lyme disease by killing ticks in their yard, when many of them are not proven and they're usually not effective. But out of fear, people are bringing in, insecticides into their yards, which harm not just the ticks, but kill a lot of beneficial insects as well, when they could be trying to invite opossums, which are totally harmless. Actually, just one quick story. I have a personal affinity for them. When I was in college, a friend of mine worked at a nature center, and she took me there, one day to kind of show me the animals that she was working with, and they wildlife rehabbers there rehabbed a lot of wild animals. And there was an opossum there, and I had, again, no experience at all with opossums, but this one was rescued as a teeny baby. Often they're killed on the road, so many. And opossums, by the way, are marsupials. They're the only North American marsupial. So the same way that kangaroos carry their babies in a pouch, opossums also carry their babies in a pouch. So they have all these little babies in their tummy, and they sometimes climb on the mommy's back, and she walks around with them. They can have like many babies at once, 6, 10 babies. So often they'll be hit on the road, and the mommy will die, but the babies will still be alive in the tummy, in the pouch. And so there's a way that you can actually take the babies out and bring them to a rehab or to rescue. But at any rate, my friend introduced me literally to a rescued opossum, and she handed it to me, and I held it. It was like a koala bear. I mean, it was just in my arms, adorably cute. I know, they look different than other animals, but it was so adorable, and it's just very docile, and they're really lovely creatures and totally harmless. They have amazing little hands. If you ever get to see their little paws, they're just adorable. So I would say, in your evolution, Malcolm, about opossums, I encourage you to continue to be open-minded about them. Maybe I'll send you some pictures and articles, but they're so beneficial.
I'm not sure whether it's the opossum I'm thinking of, but one of them has separate fingers. I think it's the opossum.
Yeah, they have the 5 fingers that looks like a hand.
Yeah, jazz hands. Cool. Jazz hands. Just the opossums could do a little jazz dance. They're very, very important to the life cycle in the wood. I mean, they're extremely important, and that's another thing. You don't want to destroy property and destroy things like possums. And just to pick out something we mentioned quickly when we were talking earlier, Victoria, about the Rockefeller Center tree. There was in the tree an owl, an owl that survived transportation to the Big Apple. And luckily they were able to bring it to a sanctuary, get it checked and then release it into a sanctuary upstate. But this is what happens when you cut trees. You're just you know, I just, for the life of me, just don't get it. I mean, I have a lot of trees on my property, like more than a lot of people in this area, because it's on a cul-de-sac and it's like 2 acres almost. And a lot of oaks, by the way.
Oh, great.
But a lot of trees are down, after 30 years of living here and all these storms. And I haven't really done anything with the down trees. Should I leave them? What should people do to maintain their forest and not chop it up is my question.
Great question. Great question. So, people think about a living tree versus a dead tree, right? And so we are, again, on a homeownership, landscaping kind of level. People think if there's a tree on my property that has died, I need to get it removed. And there are a zillion arborists out there who make a living. I mean, with all due respect to arborists, many of them do make a living taking down trees. It's an expensive proposition. And it's also a safety issue, right? So as we think about climate change and we think about extreme weather, right? So look at New York, the Northeast, the Sandy superstorm that hit, huge winds, healthy trees that came down because the wind hit at a certain angle and uprooted all these healthy, mature trees. And sometimes the more vulnerable trees come down. But what we know is that trees are very negatively impacted by these severe storms, windstorms especially. So not only are trees coming down, like you're saying in your yard, you have trees that are down, but also people have trees on their property that maybe are mature, maybe they've died of natural causes. Maybe there's an invasive insect. So one thing that we find has happened over the years is insects have been introduced into the into North America, the United States, to counter certain diseases and other insects that are on our trees and other in the landscape. And those insects actually become exceedingly, overrunning our environment and our ecosystem, and they reach invasive status and really do a lot of harm, like the emerald ash borer that is devastating the ash trees, and other insects that really are having a negative impact. So if a tree is dying or dead on your property, it doesn't mean that you have to remove it, right? You can actually, one very important thing to do is to help create what's called a snag, S-N-A-G. A snag is a partial tree, basically like anywhere from 10 to 25 feet of a tree trunk. So let's say I have a dead tree on my property that maybe it's somewhat near my home and I don't want it to fall and there is a safety issue. I can bring in an arborist to take off a big piece of the tree and leave as much of a portion of the trunk as possible as a snag. Because that dead tree, whether it's on the floor of the forest in your yard, right? I think it sounds like you have a forest. You're fortunate, Maxine, in your backyard. If there's a tree on the ground or if there's a tree standing up that's not alive, it's going to support insects. Many insects are going to feed on that wood, very important, and they're going to actually help decompose the wood and it becomes part of the soil. There are also going to be birds, woodpeckers especially, who need to have the insects. That people have bird feeders. And we put seeds outside of our homes to attract birds. Most birds, the vast majority of birds, primarily eat insects. So if they're eating seeds because there's no other food, or maybe it's part of their diet, the majority of their food is insects. And in fact, most birds feed only caterpillars to their babies. So if a bird brings back a sunflower seed to its nestlings, the nestlings can't digest that. They can only digest insects and soft insects. So you need those trees that are going to be propagating the caterpillars.
But Victoria,
the caterpillars, can still use those trees.
Yeah, Victoria, I just want to get one other aspect, which is very important, I would say, on the West Coast. We are inundated with fires, and they say the fires basically it's the dead trees and the brush, and it's going to become worse and worse now that we have the global warming, which we could get into another topic. But with the global warming, we are, I think, 4 million acres were burnt this year, which is like about 4 times as much. What can we do about that? And most of the land is federal land, which is interesting to know. So he can't blame, we don't have the gardeners to sweep it up. What do we do with those dead trees?
I think that's an interesting forestry question. Exactly. I know the answer right now. It's a big question, Malcolm, and there are many people looking at that right now. because we can't control how hot it's getting, right? I mean, it's very hard prophylactically to prevent the fires. I mean, you know, on a more micro level, I mean, we need to kind of combat climate change and try to bring the heat down as much as we can so that it doesn't continue to progress. But it's very hard to prevent obviously you can prevent human-made forest fires in terms of people starting fires, but when it comes to heat-based reasons like you're talking about, it's very hard. And there really has to be a lot of forest management after these fires. You know, how much of those trees are we going to leave on the, you know, how much of the devastation do we leave? And then I mean, forests are incredible. They do regenerate. I mean, think about the Native Americans. Many of them would burn down areas of forest, and it was part of the regeneration process and very healthy. Now we've far exceeded that. I mean, when you're talking about the acreage, it's dramatic. But there are ways to kind of let some of it stay and regenerate on its own, and then do intentional planting, you know, what's called tree communities of trees interact with other trees, and it's important to plant, you know, the appropriate trees in the right places. But certainly reforesting is becoming a very big, important priority.
Now, another topic which I like to hit on is, you know, we're talking about the trees being nesting places for all the different insects and birds. But I know that trees give, you know, breathe in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen, and that we have, I think, like I think it was 60 or 70% of the world's oxygen was generated in the Amazon. So aside from anything else, how do you feel about, how do we control developers from ruining the forest and taking the trees to, you know, either clear the land or get the wood for building, or get the wood for, which I think is total waste, paper. But are there people working on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a critically important question, Malcolm. When you think about the rainforest and how many acres and acres we're losing to developers, to, you know, products like palm oil. I mean, think about orangutan habitat in the rainforest, that these orangutan, I mean, I encourage everyone to go search online, orangutan and rainforest, and you'll see, you know, just devastatingly horrific videos of the orangutans watching the trees coming down around them. And what is it for? A number of different products, but palm oil is one of the major ones. And so you know, what can we do? Really be conscious about what you're purchasing, right? Don't buy anything with, I've actually started looking at labels. I don't really buy anything with palm oil in it anymore. I try not to support companies that use palm oil. So, you know, what we are purchasing and being informed consumers, it's so easy to just kind of look at things that we want and not look at the ingredients. But that is a huge piece. I mean, we need to kind of send a message to corporations and the people who are devastating the forest. I mean, it's a very complicated issue because in these countries, there are all kinds of political dynamics going on and economic dynamics. And until we start really prioritizing, and this is one hope I have for the next administration coming in, you know, the Biden administration, to be more conscious and more, you know, more of an advocate around not only national, but be a voice internationally. At the very least, rejoining the Paris Accord, but really being a proactive advocate to save the rainforest and to really, on a policy level, make sure that we know the devastation, that it's short-term and it's long-term. And there's really no turning back once we, you know, continue to cut back these acres and acres of rainforest that are so beneficial, not just to that region, but really globally.
Well, I think what people fail to realize is that and I'm an internationalist now, we can't be a country that stands alone. There are too many, I mean, with the pandemic, it showed that, you know, something that happens, whether it be China, whether it be any place around the world, within days is here. Same thing with the rainforests and the Amazon. They give us most of our oxygen. So what happens there happens here, or the fires in Southern California, that smoke and that pollution was going around the world. I know I was reading where it was affecting Scotland and England because their air was polluted because of our forest fires. And it's no longer where we can, again, stand alone. And that's when you say, you know, America first. It can't be America first. It has to be, we are part of the world.
Right, it's true. And when you think about, trees, the environment, they can't speak for themselves, right? I mean, they really are dependent on us as human allies to be the voice and to really make it a priority to protect the lands, the trees, the environment, for everyone's benefit. I mean, that's the thing. It's mutually beneficial, right? It helps us breathe. We need the oxygen. We need the carbon sequestration that the trees provide. We need the positive benefits of, and not even to mention the health benefits trees have for us. I mean, the physiological, emotional benefits. I mean, it's a win-win. It's good for us as human beings, for our survival, for our happiness, for our health, and it's good for the environment and the ecosystem itself. And we're all interconnected. So I'm with you. We have to think locally and globally at the same time.
Right. Or as I was talking to you earlier, that I live right next to Central Park. And the thing was that what saved me from living in the city is that after work, I would walk into Central Park and see the trees, and it was a different type of a world. I didn't live in the city. And the most beautiful part was like at the beginning of springtime. And the trees were all bare and barren. And all of a sudden I'd walk and I would see green buds on the trees. And it was like a rebirth. And then in April, the rosebuds would come out, not the rose, the
cherry blossoms.
Cherry blossoms along the path, the Central Park Reservoir. There was on the east side the cherry blossoms, and they would be on the floor. Before we leave, and I have to leave, I just wanted to read one thing. It was which I think we all learned, in public school, Trees by Joyce Kilmer. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, whose bosom snow has lain, whose intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. And that was, and I would, first time, it was Joyce Kilmer, who was a soldier in World War IV.
Well, we were almost at World War III, so four is not behind.
World War I, I'm thinking of, and the poem was written in 1914, and he has a series of other poems. But I was just reading, which I didn't know, he died at 31 in France in 1918 by a sniper's bullet.
Wow. I have one quick quote, though, before I ask Victoria where people can get information. Ancient trees are precious. There is little else on earth that plays host to such a rich community of life within a single living organism. Sir David Attenborough said that. So, and I know, Victoria, that's a great statement and represents you in a lot of ways for your getting out the information about trees. So if people want to get in touch with you, where would they do that?
So they can write to me at victoria@mynativegarden.oasis.com.
Okay.
I'd be happy to hear from anyone and answer any questions.
Okay.
And I love that you read that poem, Malcolm, and I love that quote that you read, Maxine. And when you think about one just thing to leave you all with, in terms of what you can do, in addition to becoming aware of the trees around you and preserving and protecting the ones that exist, as the poem said, only God can make a tree, only a person can plant a tree. So go out, figure out what birds you want to attract to your home and what kind of butterflies, and pick a few trees and plant them. Take this opportunity to have that impact.
And under that note, I have to wish you goodbye and thank you very much.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. Thank you both so much. Thank you for the work you do.
And if you have any announcements that you want, let us know. Send a telegram or a thing to Maxine.
Send a telegram.
Telegram. You can tell how old I am.
World War I. No.
We're just talking about World War I.
No. Send a pigeon, a homing pigeon. That would be good.
No, now we're talking about nature again.
That's what I'm saying.
Bye.
All right, guys.
Be well.
Thanks again.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us, Victoria.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Take care.